Alex Rivera used to be the kind of person people trusted with their silence. In parks on quiet evenings, strangers would close their eyes and follow his voice through guided meditations. He spoke of breath presence and surrender like he believed in them. Back then he did. Now he lives alone in a dim apartment, and the only silence left is his own. Each morning begins the same coffee-turning, cold eyes fixed on a message from someone he once loved like a brother. You can't keep using your pain to disappear. Not from me, it reads. He never replied. He never deleted it. Some mornings he tells himself he's keeping it as a reminder. Other days he admits it's a shield. Because without the pain, without the story of the one who was hurt, misunderstood, left behind what's left of him. It's a strange thing how we grieve, not just what happened, but who we became because of it. And sometimes letting go of the hurt feels like erasing ourselves. So maybe the real question isn't, how do we heal? Maybe it's harder than that. Who are we when we stop clinging to what broke us? And do we actually want to find out Alex hadn't always been afraid of stillness? Once it was his gift, the space he created for others. In silence, people felt safe. In his presence, they remembered how to breathe. But after the fracture with Daniel, stillness began to feel like punishment. It wasn't quiet anymore. It was full of echoes, unfinished conversations, and the sharp hum of things unsaid. The end hadn't come with shouting. It came with clarity. Daniel's final words in that last message still lived in Alex's chest. I love you, but I can't keep chasing someone who keeps building a fortress out of pain. It wasn't an accusation, it was resignation. Daniel hadn't slammed a door, he had simply stopped knocking. And that somehow hurt more. For a long time, Alex wore that wound like a badge. It gave shape to the fog. In his retelling, Daniel walked away. Daniel couldn't understand. Daniel left. What he never said aloud, but lived every day, was this: I made it too hard to stay. He stopped returning calls, moved to a new neighborhood without telling anyone, closed every loop before anyone could open it, and when he finally looked up from the solitude he'd built, years had passed. But pain is deceptive. It tells you you're being noble, that stepping back is self-awareness, that refusing to burden others is maturity, and perhaps sometimes it is. But for Alex, it was also avoidance. He told himself he needed more time, that one day he'd reach out, one day he'd lead again, but the truth underneath was simpler. He was afraid that without the story of his pain, he wouldn't know how to belong anywhere. Then one Tuesday afternoon he saw Daniel again. It was accidental. Alex had just stepped out of a bookstore, fingers brushing the spine of a journal he didn't plan to buy. And there Daniel was waiting in line at the register, holding a paperback in one hand, a reusable bag in the other. The years hadn't changed him much. Still the same easy posture. Still the same grounded energy that once helped Alex hold himself together. Daniel hadn't seen him yet. Alex could have turned away, walked the other direction, slipped back into the safety of being unseen, but something rooted him to the spot. Then Daniel looked up, their eyes locked. There was no drama, no cinematic swell, just a flicker of something ancient, recognition, grief, maybe even a trace of warmth. And then Daniel nodded almost imperceptibly and turned back to the cashier. Alex stood there long after Daniel walked out the door. He didn't cry, didn't spiral. But something inside shifted. Not pain weight. The kind that comes from carrying a story long past its usefulness. That night, for the first time in years, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a worn leather journal. The same one Daniel had given him on his 30th birthday. The one with a small note tucked inside for what you can't say out loud. He opened to a blank page and started writing. No filter, no structure. Just the raw truth I kept the wound open because I didn't know who I'd be if it closed. I told myself I was honoring the friendship, but I was just protecting the version of me that got to stay angry, stay small, stay certain. He didn't stop there. He kept writing every night. Some pages were confessions. Some were letters never sent. Others were just questions, simple ones but sharp. What am I still trying to prove? Who do I become if I stop defending my pain? In that daily ritual, he began to notice something strange. His pain had routines. It had language, it had postures, and more importantly, it had patterns. Every time he came close to reaching out to Daniel, to anyone, he could feel the familiar thoughts rise up. They won't understand. You're not ready. You'll get hurt again. But the journal became a witness to something else. The small, repeated moments when he didn't believe those thoughts anymore. One night, as he scribbled in the quiet, another line surfaced and startled him. Maybe I've been rehearsing the pain to avoid rehearsing presence. It didn't feel like poetry. It felt like a mirror. He remembered something his teacher once told him on retreat. The arrow is not the wound, but if you keep clinging to it, you'll never stop bleeding. Back then, he thought it was profound. Now he understood it was a warning. In the days that followed, Alex found himself reaching for stillness again, not the performative kind he used to lead, but something humbler. He sat on his cushion without agenda. No mantras, no timer, just breath. And in those quiet moments, he began to notice something softer underneath the ache, an ache for truth, for honesty, not just with others, but with himself. He caught himself reaching for the old narrative Daniel gave up. I was the one who felt everything too deeply. But now there was a pause before the loop continued. A question slipped in. Is this still true, or just familiar? That pause, he realized, was freedom, and for the first time he wondered what would it mean to live without needing to be the one who was hurt, not healed, not better, just not ruled by the wound. He didn't have an answer yet, but he had a blank page, a breath, and for now that was enough. Alex didn't rush the process. Something in him knew not to. This wasn't about checking boxes or making a comeback. It was about learning how to sit with what remained once the noise of self-defense quieted down. And what remained mostly was fear, quiet, embedded, and convincing. Some mornings the journal was easy. Words spilled out like rain. Other days he stared at the page and couldn't write a single line. But even that was a shift. He used to flee from stillness when it didn't offer clarity. Now he stayed. He was learning that not knowing was a sacred part of healing, too. One day he wrote a single sentence and then sat with it for hours. I don't know who I am without the story of being hurt. There it was, the truth without ornaments. Pain had become more than emotion. It was identity. His decisions, relationships, even his silence were shaped by it. Letting it go didn't feel like freedom. It felt like self-erasure. As if, without the suffering, nothing would be left to hold on to. In Buddhist teaching, this process is named upadana clinging. It doesn't just mean attachment to pleasures or people. It includes ideas, narratives, roles. The ego's need to feel important even through suffering. And beneath every form of clinging, there is tanha, craving, the subtle hunger to be someone, to matter, to feel solid in a shifting world, even if that solidity is built from pain. Alex had taught these words before, but understanding a concept and being undone by it are different things. Clinging sounds so abstract until you see it in your own handwriting night after night, until you realize you're not healing because you're still feeding the story that you're the one who always gets left behind. So he experimented. What if he didn't need to be that person today just for one morning? He woke up, didn't check the old message, didn't rehearse the ache. He made coffee, opened the window, let air touch his skin. It wasn't profound, but it was new. That afternoon, while walking through the park, he passed a child building a sand castle. The wind blew and part of it collapsed. The child paused, looked at the broken corner, and calmly began building again. No tears, no outrage, just flow. Alex sat on a nearby bench and watched. Something in him softened. Maybe resilience wasn't about rebuilding stronger walls. Maybe it was about being soft enough to rebuild at all. That night, he dreamed again of the river. Only this time he wasn't holding anything. He was just wading into the current. He could feel the pull, but he wasn't afraid. His arms moved freely. There was no box, no burden, just water. In the morning, he didn't rush to interpret the dream. He just sat with it, let it echo. Later that day, he received a message from a mindfulness center. He had applied weeks ago, unsure if he even wanted the position. The reply was polite but firm. We're currently seeking someone with more consistent presence in the past 2 years. He read the words twice. They didn't sting in the way rejection used to. Instead, they illuminated something he hadn't admitted to himself. He had exiled himself. No one had pushed him out. He had stepped back quietly, then convinced himself he'd been abandoned. Pain had been both shield and excuse. But now without it, he could see the truth more clearly. And while it hurt, it also liberated. That night he didn't write. Instead, he lit a small candle and sat by the window. No agenda, just presence. After a while, a line came to him, not to be written, but to be felt. You don't need the pain to feel real. You're real with or without it. In the following days, Alex shifted his practice. He began meditating again, not to achieve calm, but to witness his mind, to notice when the story tried to take the reins, to smile at it gently and say, "Not today." He also returned to his cushion with one small ritual he used to love, dropping a coin into a ceramic bowl after each sit. It wasn't spiritual, just a habit. But it felt like planting something small, like saying this moment counts. He also visited the community garden where he once volunteered. No one remembered him, and that was fine. He watered plants, pulled weeds, and listened to the soil like it had something to teach. He didn't need applause, just movement, just aliveness. Then came the invitation. A group he used to teach with reached out. Their usual facilitator was stepping away. Would Alex be willing to guide a session again? Just one. Just to hold space. At first, the old voice returned. "You're not ready? What if you break down? What if it's all just pretend?" But another voice, quieter, older, answered, "You don't need to be whole to speak. You just need to be honest." He said yes. Before the session, he didn't script anything. He sat with his own breath, opened his journal, and found a page he had written weeks earlier. "You say you want peace. But what would you do with it if it arrived?" He closed the book and smiled. That was the question he'd carry with him into the room. When he walked into the meditation hall, it smelled of incense and wood polish. People were already seated. He noticed a few familiar faces, and one unfamiliar one that made his chest tighten, Daniel sitting in the back row. Their eyes met. No words, just breath. Alex bowed his head, not in shame. In presence, he sat down at the front, not to teach, not to impress, just to begin. The room was quiet in that sacred way meditation spaces often are filled, not with silence, but presence. As Alex sat down at the front, his knees adjusted into the familiar shape of the posture, but everything else felt new. His palms rested lightly on his thighs. His breath was unforced. He didn't prepare a speech. He hadn't even written notes. What he had instead was honesty, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. He opened his eyes and looked out at the small circle. A few heads were already bowed, eyes closed. A few were watching him, waiting. Daniel sat at the back, his gaze steady but soft. There was no accusation there, no invitation either. Just presence, Alex began. I'm not here as a teacher today, he said, voice calm, steady. I'm not even sure I know how to be that person anymore. What I do know is this: sometimes we carry pain, not because it's still hurting, but because we don't know who we'd be without it. A few people nodded. No one moved. He continued. I used to think I needed to fix myself before I could show up. That I had to be healed, resolved, complete. But what I've learned in the past year is that sometimes showing up in pieces is more honest than pretending to be whole. He led them through a breath practice. Nothing elaborate. Inhale, exhale. Feel the body where it meets the ground. Let the ground hold you. Let the story go, just for now. At the end of the sit, he invited a reflection. If you've been carrying something, an old story, a role, a wound, ask yourself gently, is this still serving me? Or am I serving it? The room stayed still for a while after the bell rang. No one rushed out. Some offered quiet smiles, grateful nods. As the space emptied, Alex stood slowly, unsure if he'd stay behind or just slip away. Daniel waited at the door. When it was just the two of them left, Alex approached. They stood in silence for a long moment. There was no dramatic confrontation. No apologies rehearsed or owed. The air was plain and human. Daniel was the one who spoke first. That felt grounded. Alex smiled. It's the only way I know now. They sat together on the front steps outside the building. The sun was beginning to drop behind the city skyline. There was wind, but not enough to interrupt. Daniel pulled a small stone from his pocket and passed it to Alex. You gave me this once, he said. Said it was for when things got shaky. I've been carrying it ever since. It helped, even when we weren't talking. Alex held the stone thumb running across its smooth surface. It had worn down a bit, edges softened from time. It felt lived in, real. I used to think I had to hold on to everything to make sure it mattered, Alex said. But maybe letting go is how we know it mattered enough. Daniel nodded. I wasn't always fair, you know. I walked away too fast. I didn't know how to stay with someone who was unraveling. That makes two of us, Alex said. I didn't know how to be seen unraveling. I thought I had to bleed quietly. The wind shifted. Leaves stirred across the sidewalk. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was whole. They didn't make plans to reconnect. There were no promises. But something had shifted subtly, quietly, in that honest way things shift, when no one is forcing resolution. That night Alex didn't return to his journal. He didn't light a candle. He simply sat at his kitchen table, opened the window, and let the evening in. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like exile. It felt like invitation. He picked up a pen and wrote a single sentence on a scrap of paper. I no longer need my pain to remember who I am. He folded the paper, placed it in the bowl he used to drop coins into after meditation. The bowl had gathered dust forgotten like the practice it once held. But now it looked different, like something ready to begin again. The next morning he returned to the community garden. The coordinator handed him gloves, surprised but welcoming. He worked for hours without speaking, just tending, watering, pulling, clearing. At one point he found a patch of stubborn roots that refused to be pulled. He smiled, gently loosened the soil around them. Didn't force. Just gave them time. The following week he led another meditation. Then another. Not every session was graceful. Some days he stumbled over words. Some silences felt empty, not sacred. But he showed up. And slowly people did too. A woman from one session stopped him outside the hall. What you said about letting go of stories. She hesitated. It made me realize I've been calling myself a widow for 5 years. but maybe I'm also still a woman who can fall in love again." Alex didn't offer wisdom. He just nodded. That was enough. Weeks passed. The email from Daniel remained unread. He never deleted it, but he no longer opened it either. It had lost its grip, lost its weight. The story had changed. One afternoon, Alex returned to the river from his dreams. He stood on the bank watching the water move. No boxes this time. No need to carry anything. Just him, the current, and the feeling that maybe finally he didn't have to prove anything anymore. He picked up a stone. Not symbolic, not ceremonial. Just a simple gesture. He let it rest in his hand for a moment, then tossed it gently into the water. There was no echo, no finality, just the sound of letting go. And that was enough. Maybe your pain looks nothing like Alex's. Maybe it came quietly through a slow unraveling of dreams, through the silence after someone walked away, through the stillness of a life that no longer feels like yours. But if you've carried it long enough that it feels like identity, if letting go feels like erasing yourself, then maybe this story was meant for you. We don't cling to suffering because we're weak. We cling because it's familiar. Because pain gives us a shape when everything else feels formless. Because it tells us who we are until we're ready to decide for ourselves. But what if you don't need to prove you were hurt anymore? What if you don't need the ache to feel alive, the bitterness to feel righteous, or the story to feel real? What if freedom isn't about becoming someone new, but simply no longer being ruled by the old? You are not your wounds. You are not the person who got left, failed, or broke. You are the breath that kept going, the quiet presence beneath it all. You are the space that remains after the story ends, and that space is not empty. It's sacred. So today, maybe all you do is pause and ask, am I still choosing this pain, or is it choosing me? If that question softens something inside you, stay with it. Don't rush. Let it unfold. And if this story resonated, if it found you in a moment where you needed a hand, reaching back through the dark, subscribe to the channel. We're building something here. Not answers, not fixes, just a place to breathe, to remember to be human together. This isn't about getting over it. It's about learning to stand quietly beside your pain and whisper, "You don't need to protect me anymore.